Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something a little different. It's a single poem, actually,
Oh, wow.
called Red Soil on White Coffin,
Okay.
written by Mildred Achoch
Mm-hmm.
back in 2014.
All right.
And she wrote this after the passing of her mother. So um, Mildred was 34 at the time,
Yeah.
her mother in her 60s.
Okay.
And Mildred is a Christian. Now, this poem isn't a typical, mourning poem or anything. It's not really an elegy.
Right.
It's more of just this raw outpouring of grief.
Yeah.
And she uses these really powerful metaphors.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to kind of unpack some of these metaphors
Interesting.
and see what they reveal about Mildred's experience with this loss.
I think that's a great way to look at it. What's fascinating is how she captures that feeling of your world just shattering. You
Yeah.
know, it's something we all fear, but
Yeah.
she puts it into words so beautifully.
It's really powerful. And she starts right off the bat, these first couple lines.
Yeah.
She says, "It was like a question mark after a 60-year sentence."
Wow.
It's like a question mark shaped keyhole, and I didn't have the key.
Yeah.
So right away, we get this feeling of confusion, this
Yeah.
searching for answers.
Yeah.
What do you think she's getting at here?
It really speaks to that initial shock you feel when someone close to you passes, right? You're looking for a reason, for some explanation for
Reason.
why, especially for someone like Mildred who's deeply religious.
Right.
But it's like the answer's elusive. Like even God himself has it locked away and she doesn't have the key.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you keep looking for the answer and you can't find it.
Right.
And it's like that question mark just keeps hanging there.
Exactly.
And then she goes on to say, childhood things turning to dust.
Oh, wow.
So we're getting this sense of, things falling apart.
Yeah.
How do you see this image connecting with that question mark from the beginning?
It's like she's highlighting the contrast between death, which is so permanent, and life, which is so fragile, even memories.
Mm-hmm.
It's as if her childhood, represented by these objects, is suddenly gone, vanished along with her mother. And you begin to wonder if it all meant anything, you know? When the physical remnants of life fade away.
Yeah, because once those things are gone,
Yeah.
you're only left with the memory.
Right.
And sometimes memories are kind of fuzzy.
They are.
And so it's like, is that all that's left?
Exactly.
And then building on this idea of things kind of disintegrating,
Mm-hmm.
she has these lines about wanting to retreat inward.
Hmm.
She says, it was like wanting to return back to her womb, but finding no opening. It was like tears so heavy that they fell back inside me instead of out my eyes.
Wow.
What's with this inward focus?
I think it shows how grief can just completely overwhelm you. You want to escape the pain so badly.
Yeah.
Find some refuge. And sometimes that means retreating into yourself, even if there's no escape.
Mhm.
And those tears falling inward, it's like the grief is so heavy. It can't even be expressed outwardly.
Yeah, that image of the tears falling inward.
It's powerful.
It's so powerful.
Yeah.
And then she goes on to this line about a big black hole. She says, it was like a big black hole inside me, imploding the universe that is her.
Yeah.
And I think this ties right back into the title of the poem, Red Soil on White Coffin.
Absolutely. That black hole is the void left by her mother's death. Her whole world, universe has collapsed inward. And the red soil, I think that symbolizes the earthliness of death,
Yeah.
that finality. And the white coffin, it's such a stark image of absence.
Right.
It really emphasizes that feeling of implosion.
Yeah, and then right after that, she has these lines. It was like her yellow sun turning into a red giant right before my eyes, red soil debris getting into my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting this transformation from yellow to red.
Yeah.
What do you think is happening here?
Well, the yellow sun, I think that represents her mother as this life-giving force, right? Like full of warmth and energy.
Right.
And then it shifts to the red giant, which in astronomy is basically the death of a star.
Right.
So the mother goes from this vibrant being to the red soil, which we already talked about as representing death.
Right.
And the red soil debris in her eyes, I think that represents the pain of witnessing this transformation,
Right.
of having to confront that harsh reality.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, Mildred was only 34 when this happened.
That's young.
So I imagine losing a parent at that age,
Okay.
it hits you differently than, say, if you lost a parent, as a child.
Absolutely. At 34, you've had time to establish your own life separate from your parents.
Mm-hmm.
You're not a child relying on them anymore, but you also haven't reached that age where it might feel like a natural part of life, you know?
Right.
So yeah, it's like this in-between space
Yeah.
where the loss can feel especially jarring.
And she talks about this feeling directly.
Mm-hmm.
He has this one line. It was like 34 years condensed into one grain of that red soil in my hands.
Wow.
So how do you see that? How is she viewing her own life in the face of all this?
I think it shows how loss can just warp your perception of time. Suddenly, 34 years, which is a long time, it feels insignificant compared to this loss.
Right.
And it makes you question things like the passage of time. Like, what did my experiences even mean? It's as if all those years, all those experiences just culminate in this one moment of grief, symbolized by that tiny grain of soil.
Yeah, and then right at the end, we get this big shift. Up to this point, she's been very focused inward.
Right.
But then she says, it was his red blood replacing my spine and my grief. That's such a stark change from everything else in the poem.
It is.
What do you think she's doing here?
This is where Mildred's faith comes in.
Okay.
His most likely refers to Christ, and the red blood that symbolizes his sacrifice, which offers strength and support. So it's like she's finding a new way to deal with the void left by her mother.
Yeah.
Not that the grief goes away entirely, but she's able to move forward.
Yeah. So we've gone through this really powerful poem.
It really is.
All these feelings of grief, confusion, retreat,
Yeah.
and then finally this strength from her faith.
Powerful stuff.
But for me, what's really striking is how Mildred uses these incredible metaphors to describe something so universal.
Right.
Something that so many of us have felt, but like struggle to put into words.
It is hard to describe.
So as a listener, what do you think?
Mm-hmm.
How could this poem help you
Yeah.
to deal with loss?
I think it encourages us to find our own ways to express grief.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's through metaphors or writing or art, whatever, we all experience loss differently, and finding ways to articulate those feelings, it can be so powerful.
Yeah.
And I think Mildred's poem, it invites us to do just that, to look inward and confront our own experiences, and maybe, just maybe, we can find solace in unexpected places.
Yeah. And that's something we could all use a little bit of, I think.
Definitely.
So thank you all for listening to another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you then.